This episode of the Beauté by AVIC podcast is brought to you by Professional Beauty Solutions. Hello and welcome to the Beauté by AVIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Here, we are strengthening and unifying the industry through representation, innovation, and education. This is a platform created and dedicated to the aesthetic and beauty industry, valuing unity and advancement. We serve to represent, support, and inspire you by connecting you with industry experts, expanding your knowledge through educational pieces, and bringing you the latest industry news. This is Beauté by AVIC. I'm your host, Stephanie Miller, and today's guest is Dr. Abs Settipalli for Professional Beauty Solutions. Dr. Settipalli, also known as Dr. Abs, is a dentist with a special interest in cosmetic dentistry and facial aesthetics. After graduating from the University of Leeds in the UK, Dr. Abs practices cosmetic medicine and dentistry at a global level. He is also a clinical trainer for medical professionals, lectures at universities, writes for scientific and commercial publications, and has recently written a book about LED phototherapy. He enjoys combining his knowledge in both dentistry and medicine to treat the entire person as a whole: smile, skin, face, hair, and body. Dr. Abs is a global opinion leader for several companies, and when not working in clinic, he regularly lectures in the UK and abroad. He has authored books on his areas of expertise and has recently written a book about LED phototherapy and created protocols in medical technologies that are now used globally. Here to discuss the importance of using a medical certified LED device to treat skin conditions for Professional Beauty Solutions, today we welcome Dr. Abs. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Abs. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Oh, we're very excited to have you on the show today. We always start our podcast the same way. We ask our guests, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in the aesthetics industry.
Sure. So I started off originally as a dental background, actually, and then I just always had interest in other things, and I eventually got into aesthetics, and then just ran wild, and I'm pretty much doing no dentistry at all now. But my interest is basically in sort of science in general as well, not just how it applies to aesthetics. So, for instance, when I was in school, I finished the sort of 12th and 13th grade syllabus. It should have been 2 years. I finished it in 2 months, and then I started learning undergraduate physics instead. And then even now I still read about those sorts of things, and I do a lot of biochemistry, pure cellular biology, and that kind of stuff. So all that kind of stuff makes me really enjoy the deep science of things. And I think when it comes to LED, I've got a lot of clinical experience to combine that with. So I think I have quite a unique perspective in the whole sort of treatment modality.
Look, this sounds fascinating and right up our alley. I'm a bit of a science nerd myself, and a keen interest in LED and light-based therapies. And of course, today our podcast is all about light-based therapies and LED. And we've got, for anybody listening now, in our industry would know it's a staple in our treatment menu to have light-based therapies. But are we using them to their fullest advantage? That's the thing. And are we using them in the correct way? And a lot of people have a big misunderstanding about actually what LED is. Can you please give us a brief overview of what LED is and why you actually think this treatment is of such value?
Yeah, LED is very, very unique. And it's, to put it in a single sentence, you are using radiation to control what's happening inside a cell. So if you were to use something, that has slightly less energy than LED therapy, all you're doing is just heating things up. You might as well stand next to a radiator. If you're using energy beyond the scope of LED, then you're going into the territory of things like lasers, where there's so much energy, things just sort of die instantly. Things just, get shattered straight away. and you're causing damage. And in laser, that's fine. You're doing that on purpose and for a particular reason. But you get into that golden window, that sweet spot, and you have energy that doesn't just heat things up or kill things off. You have energy that actually causes a biological change to take place. It's the equivalent of taking your hand and reaching down into someone's cell and moving a little product from A to B, and that triggers that point B to then start off a new process all by itself. And there's no other way you can do that. And when you think about it, that means cellular processes are occurring at your command or at your will. And we've never had this ability before. The closest we've ever gotten is, taking a drug, but that's still not happening at your will. It goes through your digestive system, then into your bloodstream, and then you have to cross your fingers and hope that things happen. But then you've got the problem of side effects and all this kind of stuff as well, and then dosage, or et cetera, et cetera. Whereas with LED, you can bypass the entire digestive system and you can just go straight into the cell that needs to do something, and you're making it happen there and then. So literally the moment you put the switch on, that process is occurring. And that's why you can get so remarkable results, especially in terms of speed. Acne, you might have looked at months before, 6 months on Roaccutane or something like that. And then you've obviously got all the side effects of that. Whereas an acne nowadays, in a couple of weeks, it can completely disappear. And like I said, that's because everything's happening at your will. You don't have the drugs, you don't have injections, you don't need a liver function test, you don't need a kidney function test. Everything is happening straight away. And that makes it completely unique. And energetically speaking, because anything less is just heating up, anything more is causing damage like a laser, it will never be replicated because there's only a fixed spectrum of energy. And so this, I think, will stay for the long term. I think it's never really going to be matched. I think more people may enter the market, but in terms of which LED device to choose, even if more people enter the market, it's very, very difficult to actually create a good LED product.
It sure is. And you explained the process of hormesis so perfectly and
you.
so understandably. I've never heard it explained in such a passionate way as well, whereby different degrees of heat or different degrees of that light energy input can change what happens inside the cell. And tell us, just a little bit of an overview, how do those photons, what do they do inside the cell to the mitochondria, to ATP? Just give us a little bit of information about what is the process that's going on there, and why do those photons tickle that cell so well to actually modulate itself?
So in terms of the effect they have on ATP, which is the sort of energy currency of the cell, just depending on which wavelength you're talking about. So if we talk about red, for instance, that's probably one of the most appropriate in terms of increasing the amount of ATP that a cell has. And that essentially hits this sort of chain that we have inside the mitochondria. We have this sort of conveyor belt, and it's where point A passes a pair of electrons to point B, to point C, to point D, etc. And when it gets to the end, we have an enzyme called ATP synthase. And ATP synthase uses a process called active transport to transport hydrogen ions or hydrogen free radicals against the direction that they would like to go. So as an example, if you have a piece of tissue and you drop some water in the middle of that tissue, you clearly know it's going to spread out, right? And that's obvious. And the direction it wants to go is from an area of high concentration, i.e. where you've dropped it, to low concentration, which is where the rest of the tissue is dry. Active transport is the equivalent of dropping some water, in multiple places in that tissue, and instead of all of them spreading out, they all spread together into one spot. And ATP synthase does that for hydrogen. So it pushes all of them into an area where they all want to repel each other and traps them. And then it only gives them one way out in this tiny little tunnel that they have to go through. And they always will, because it's generating too much electrochemical pressure on one side. And when it goes through, what happens is it rolls through this tunnel, but it rolls through similar to a river rolling past a windmill. In order to roll through, it has to make contact with that windmill, which then turns, and then you do whatever you want with that energy, like a hydroelectric dam. So these hydrogen radicals go through that tunnel and they physically turn. And I really do mean it is a physical process. There's a thing turning. It's the sort of smallest machine in the universe, ATP synthase. And so when it turns, it basically shoves together two different molecules with that turning energy. So it shoves together a phosphate with a DP, adenosine diphosphate, and it pushes them into each other with the energy of that turning force, which is enough to force them to bond. And then you get ATP. And that's how it's created.
Incredible process. And how does photonic energy, how do the photons stimulate that to
So
occur
essentially,
in
they're,
a better way?
yeah, good question. So what they're doing is basically, if you think back to when I said, point A passes things to point B, C, D, etc., it's
Yeah.
basically speeding up that process. So by force feeding all these things along that conveyor belt sort of factory chain that we have, you're increasing the amount of active transport that's then occurring. Because as things get transferred from A to B to C to D, etc., what's happening is some of these hydrogens are being shot off the chain onto one
They're being
side of the
placed.
chain. Exactly. And then as you go along and you're taking off more and more hydrogen, you're peeling more and more bananas, you're building up this pile of banana skins, which are these hydrogen free radicals. So think of it as, a banana traveling through all these different points, and it gets peeled as more and more as it travels all through these points. And those peels all get built up, and that's what's happening. And those peels are the hydrogens, and those hydrogens have only one way out.
And the photons assist that process to occur more rapidly and not
Exactly.
have nitrogen displace the hydrogen. Nitrogen displace the hydrogen. Is that right?
So nitrogen doesn't necessarily displace the hydrogen. Nitrogen monoxide isoforms can essentially block that conveyor belt. So think of things in a factory going around, and what's happened is someone's just put their arm down the conveyor belt, and everything's piling up by hitting their arm, and that's what's happening.
And that's what the photonic energy does. It clears that up. And I think that everybody listening to this now, they understand, oh, look, LED works, light photon energy works to stimulate the cell in a certain way, but they don't really understand how. And sometimes you can get caught up in, oh, is it placebo? Does it really work? Is it scientific?
Yeah.
How is this really happening? Because I can't feel anything happening on my skin. I can see this, result. Does it last? Is it going to be, successful in the long term? But understanding that, no, there's actually a scientific process that's happening there. It's real. Yeah. You can measure it. You can actually see the result. Gives credibility to something that seems like such a gentle, incredible, almost magical treatment, right?
Exactly. I mean, even if you sit in the sun, that's radiation interacting with skin. Your skin gets darker. You don't necessarily feel anything happening in your skin, but you can see the effect of it in the tan that you get. If you were to, put your hand inside under a UV light too long, you can't feel what's happening inside a cell, but you're going to feel a burn. So there's effects, and just because you can't feel the effect doesn't mean nothing is happening.
You touched on so many different LEDs in the market, and we are becoming a little bit swamped with LEDs in the market. But there are LEDs and LEDs. There are LEDs that have been tested, proven. They have had their trials done. They are set up in a certain way to deliver certain energy levels and so forth. Tell us the difference, because we have so much choice. Sometimes as a clinic owner, you do get confused. Where should I go? What should I do? What type of LED should I buy?
Sure. I mean, the first thing to do is actually just ignore all marketing. You ignore all opinions, because opinions can be biased. They can be told by people who receive a paycheck at the end of the day. Marketing is there just to sell you something. The way you judge these things is actually just using pure facts, because numbers don't lie, and that's the best way to judge these things. And when you look at which LED you're using, that's as important as if you're trying to buy a raincoat, but you probably don't in Australia, but here in Britain we buy a lot of raincoats. Asking, is it waterproof, is the underpinning of the entire purpose of that item. If it's not waterproof, well, what's the point of buying a raincoat? And the analogy to LED is, well, if it's not a good LED, then what treatment are you actually going to achieve? You're not going to achieve anything. So the quality of the LED is paramount. And what happens is most manufacturers in the world, they will go to an LED manufacturer. So, Samsung, Sony, when they're making TVs, they'll do that. Apple, when they're trying to build a phone and they need little lights inside, they'll do that. And these LED manufacturers have all these different LED types just sat on a shelf on their shop window. People come along and say, I'll have 10,000 of those, I'll have 1 million of those, etc. But the fact is, these aren't created for phototherapy. These are created for things like TVs and phones and advertising boards and things like that. And phototherapy has a completely different requirement for LEDs. Yes, it needs to output light energy. That's fine.
Mm.
But actually, the way it does that is completely different. And again, this is not an opinion. This is just a fact. And so most manufacturers, when they shop in this same way, they are not going to get the LEDs that are best for phototherapy. In fact, there is no manufacturer in the world that can make an LED optimized for phototherapy. So people like, the device that I use, the Dermalux, even they actually cannot get LEDs off the shelf for what they need because they've decided that, we don't want the best off the shelf because the best off the shelf is not the best of phototherapy. We want to make the best of phototherapy. And so those LEDs are pretty much custom made and patented. And there are several different processes involved to make that LED specific for phototherapy. And that's why they can achieve metrics on their device, which no one else can achieve.
That is fascinating. I actually did not know that you could custom make your LED lights. And I'm sure people that are listening now didn't know that you could go to factories and pick LEDs off the shelf that were
Of
in
course.
TVs or that are meant for TVs.
Yeah. I urge people to, whenever you're looking at any LED device, any manufacturer, don't just ask them, how much does it cost? Do you have financing? Blah, blah. Ask them,
Mm.
where are your LEDs from? And which LEDs have you bought? That is if you just ask that one question, it tells you everything you need to know. It'll tell you why it's cheap. It'll tell you why it's not got high power. It'll tell you why it overheats. That is the underpinning of the entire device. So ask them that.
Goodness me. And it also, I would assume, would affect the results that you're going to get, not just how the performance of the actual machine, whether it overheats or all the rest of it, but
Yeah.
actually what the results are on your client's skin. Would that be affected as well?
Yeah, 100%. Because if you're not able to create the desired radiation in the desired way, you're not going to create the desired biological changes in the patient's skin. So, there's different types of LEDs, and since some are better in one application rather than another. I'll give you a very specific example. If you look at something like a 5050 or a 3535 LED, we're getting really nerdy now, by the way, but these are specific types of LEDs.
I mean, I'm pretty good at this, and 5050. Please explain.
So these numbers basically talk about the dimensions. So it's 5.0 mil times 5.0 mil, or 3.5 mil by 3.5
Right.
mil. These represent the physical dimensions of the LED chip, and these are LED chips that have 4 chips inside them. So red, green, blue, which you'll have in your TV, but it also has white. And if you use one of these for an LED device, what happens is essentially you might be turning on the red, but because the chips are all together, the heat generated from the red will now start to affect the other ones. So
Right.
they are automatically going to affect each other negatively as a result. Whereas if you are custom making your LEDs and you're having a sort of hybrid design, so it's not, shall we say, chip on board, it's not surface mount, it's not T-Pack, it's not one of these,
Yes.
you can achieve thermal independence of these chipsets. And so when one is generating heat, it has no bearing on another, which is why the Dermalux are one of the few that you can have all 3 wavelengths operating at the same time at maximum power, and you don't drop in power as the treatment goes on. It still maintains optical intensity from start to finish, year after year after year.
That is incredible, the independence of each
Yeah,
particular light, and
exactly.
having obviously a temperature insulation type temperature control situation on each light, which means you're
Yeah,
delivering the exact amount of energy throughout the entire treatment. And that's the whole point, right? It's that
exactly.
particular window of energy that needs to be delivered. You can't just deliver, oh, look around about that energy level. The particular
Yeah,
cell responds exactly to that particular wavelength or that particular energy output in a
yeah,
particular way, to create
exactly.
the
And
desired result. You shift it a little bit, and,
from
and it changes the effect.
100%, you've got it, you've got it. And it's, in a way, this is for me what I find fascinating about LED, but it's also what makes it so difficult to know what the
Difficult.
right device to buy is, or even who to listen to, because we've touched already on so many different things. We've touched on really complicated physics. We've touched on subcellular biology. We've touched on electronic engineering. We've touched on now material science. Doctors are doctors. They know how to inject someone. That's fine, but they're not physicists, they're not material scientists, they're not electrical engineers.
Mm.
And so this is why, like I said, I find it fascinating. I love science. I love learning about all these different things. I read about them anyway. But it's also why it's so difficult to know what to buy, because you can have, key opinion leader for a company, but are they able to talk about material science with this level of depth? Are they able to talk about, quantum electrodynamics and the interaction of light and matter in such a detailed way, et cetera, et cetera? I don't think there is anyone
There
available to
isn't.
do that.
I've spoken,
Exactly. And that's
I've
why
spoken to a
there's
lot
so
of
much
people
nonsense out
about
there.
LED, yes, and I can tell you I'm getting a lesson right now. I thought I knew quite a little bit about LED and low-level laser, and I'm quite shocked at what I'm learning just in this brief time that I've spoken with you. I'm fascinated about custom-built LEDs because
Yeah.
I could imagine that is such an intense process. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I know that there are ceramic LEDs that
Yeah.
do reduce the heat from the patient, from the skin or from the target tissue. Are you able to tell us just a little bit about custom made?
Yeah.
What makes that so special, and how do you do it?
Sure. I mean, first of all, ceramic doesn't necessarily reduce the heat felt by the patient.
Right.
That is going to be your immediate atmosphere, whether you've got cooling air or anything like that. The
Mm.
ceramic is essentially allowing the LED chipset to not overheat, and that's what it's doing.
Right.
And ceramics can be actually perfect thermal insulators, but also perfect thermal conductors as well. And it depends on the atomic
Mm.
structure of which that happens. If we're sticking with the nerdy level of knowledge here, when you're studying any material, and again, we're going into a combination of material science and even sort of quantum electrodynamics, atomic physics, etc. There are certain factors that you analyze a material with in order to see its performance in thermal conductivity or insulation. The first is the actual thermal conductivity value, which is called a K value or lambda value. Then you have something called surface emissivity, which is the effectiveness of actually transmitting thermal radiation. Then you have the physical dimensions of that substance, so that, the thickness, and the volume, the density of it, so how many particles are in a unit volume to actually transmit that energy. Then you've got something called specific heat capacity. Heat capacity is the amount of joules or the amount of energy you need to raise by
Yes.
1 degree 1 kilogram of that mass. And then you've also got thermal bridging, which is where a substance or this particular conductor or insulator has a higher thermal conductivity than the things around it. So it can essentially act as a thermal circuit, if you like.
Mm.
And ceramics, some are very good at this, some are very poor, and we can take advantage of that. And there are different types of engineering ceramics, advanced ceramics. One of the best ceramics of thermal conductivity, is aluminium nitride. And that's used commonly where efficient heat dissipation is needed, such as high power LED. You've also got things like beryllium oxide, silicon carbide, that's used, I think, in brake discs for cars because of the heat. Diamond is
Yes.
probably one of the best. And I personally would say when diamonds become much, much cheaper, because diamonds are overinflated, there's enough diamonds on planet Earth for everyone to have one, actually. The supply has actually
Oh,
been
good.
controlled by De
That's nice
Beers for a
to
long time. But they will come down. And when they become more commonplace, I think electronics will start to use them much more. And I suspect a good LED manufacturer will incorporate diamonds into LED chipsets in order for that thermal dissipation mechanism. And when you're trying to implement ceramic into these LEDs, actually, this is where we come back to no manufacturer is able to do it because it's not there. It's not a standard LED off the shelf item. And so you have to go around the back door and say, look, can you make this for me? I know it's not in your shop window at the front. And that's why there are multiple different processes in order to generate the LEDs that are used in Thermalux, because there is no single process that's able to create that. And so they have to make one part, take it to someone else specialized in just doing one thing, and then take it to a third place that's specialized in doing just one thing as well. And then finally, you have this LED, which by law, because it's patented, can't actually be copied, which means they have the highest metrics. For example, if you're aiming for 100 nanometers, the worst you're going to get is 90 or 102, because it has what's called an emission peak tolerance of plus or minus 2 nanometers. It's the most accurate LED in the world, but because it's patented and no one else can make it, no one else knows how to make it, that's why no one can actually get as good as Dermalux. That's why no one else has a medical CE, a medical license to treat any particular indication that Dermalux can.
That is incredible. The way you've just explained that has changed my perception about
I'm glad. I'm
LED.
glad.
And I think a lot of people listening today, this is an eye-opener, literally about the importance of doing our homework, but importance of really finding somebody that understands not just aesthetic science, but
Yeah, yeah,
material science, and somebody that's quite credible, understands the science behind how you actually make the devices.
yeah,
Because ultimately, we know the front end, we can see what's happening with the patient's skin, but we don't
exactly.
actually understand why and how and what the manufacturing process can actually do to amplify. Or sometimes we sit there with the device and like, why is this not, we're doing everything right, why is this
Yeah,
not happening for us, why is this not happening for the
yeah,
client, and we just don't understand. Perhaps we're doing something wrong, perhaps the client's not responsive for some reason, but in actual
yeah.
fact, it's so important to get it right at the manufacturing level. And, with regards to custom LEDs, it's so incredible that Dermalux has actually gone through the process of creating something, I could imagine, that's very time consuming to make and extremely expensive process
Oh,
to
you have
make.
no idea. I mean, you're talking years of development and a heck of a lot of cash. But you know
Wow.
what? It pays off because I've met the people that were behind it, and a lot of companies will say, we have a results-driven product, or we care about
Mm.
results. The fact is, they don't care. They care about creating nice marketing buzzwords, and that will sell. But actually, the only people that I've ever met in the industry that truly care about results in such a way that they will not compromise in their product, and they will not even build it until they have a guarantee they can get the best results. And that's the people behind Dermalux. Because when I spoke to them about this quite a while ago, they said, we went around everywhere looking for LEDs, and we could get them, but none of them offered the sort of excellence that we wanted. And that's why we had to make our own. And that's why, they've become the market leader, because no one else knows how to make their LED. And I don't think they'll ever get beaten.
I mean, look, just with regards to, even if we take out and isolate the heat, when we're talking about the heat component of that, so
Yeah,
many LED systems, and we're talking about ceramics, but so many LED systems on the market can actually get quite hot. The actual machine itself can get quite hot even when you touch it. I would assume, and we would know, that it really is contraindicated. Heat is one thing that, as you're talking about, can either create or destroy. If we're heating
yeah.
up the machine, obviously that's going to have a direct effect on the results of the machine. But there are other methods that Dermalux has used to counteract this heating up process other than ceramics. Can you tell us a little bit about the lengths that they've gone to with regards to their heating system technologies?
Yeah, so essentially, you're using the ceramic on the back of the LEDs as a way to draw the heat out from that, essentially. So when you touch a radiator, you're drawing heat out from the radiator to warm yourself up, and the radiator's, it needs more energy to maintain its temperature, which is not good in that context, because you're using more energy, your bills are going to be high. But in terms of LED context, the ceramic is touching the LED and taking heat away. That's allowing the semiconductor components within that LED chipset to carry on using a process called radiative recombination. That is what is emitting the actual photons. So you're talking about photons coming out of an LED chip. The exact position of that photon when it becomes released is something called a depletion region, and that is inside the semiconductor. And if you are generating heat in that region, you cannot also simultaneously emit photons. Generating heat is non-radiative recombination, and photon emission is radiative recombination. You can't have both at the same time.
Professional Beauty Solutions is Australia's leaders in bringing world-class brands and aesthetic devices to salons, spas and clinics. Empowering salons to optimise performance, product and profits, Professional Beauty Solutions is Australia's most respected and trusted supplier of professional beauty brands, servicing over 2,000 salons, spas and clinics across Australia. Their mission is to help salon partners become the most profitable in the industry. They pride themselves on offering the best advanced cosmeceutical skincare, laser and LED technology, and top-of-the-line products that achieve real results, along with a level of convenience and business support to drive products and success for their salon partners. To learn more, visit www.professionalbeautysolutions.com.au today.
And so the ceramic is there to draw that heat away. So you're shifting the needle from non-radiative to radiative recombination. Once that ceramic has drawn it away, it's then taken away using things like copper and aluminum alloys, which are great thermal conductors. So you're using conduction to draw the heat away from the LED directly. And then you've got these sort of fins at the back. You can see on the machine, actually, if you look carefully, there are these fins that stick out in the air, and the fans draw air through those fins, like air going between skyscrapers in a city. And when that happens, you're then taking away heat by convection, i.e. transferring from a solid into a gas. And the air current is taking things away. A bit like conduction is taking away heat or taking an area of high heat from a city into the sea.
Around, right?
Exactly. So using a combination of conduction into convection to cool everything down. And that conduction process is using a combination of different materials with high thermal conductivity to physically transfer heat, because heat at the end of the day is just atomic vibration. That's all. And so these specific ceramics are able to do that because the crystalline atomic lattice structure is so consistent and long and pure that all these atoms within the lattice all have a neighbor. So when one vibrates, they can transfer that vibration along using a phonon process very, very easily. And that's why the LED can maintain optical intensity so high over a long period of time. Whereas if you measure another device, you might have a peak when it's on because it's cool before it's turned on, and then it slowly drops as the treatment goes on. But in Dermalux, that doesn't.
The way that you've explained that again is so beautiful. The analogy
Thank
of
you.
the buildings and the lattice structure, it's you get a visual picture of actually what's happening. The heat
Exactly.
is
I think that's important.
yeah, absolutely it is. It's important for us to be able to trust the device. It's important to know what's actually happening inside the device and how intricate the way that it's constructed is, so that we get the final result, which is, not the patient not overheating, the photons obviously being able to do their job without being interfered with heat. But it's just incredible how you've put it all together and how Dermalux has spent so much time to work out the most perfect way of doing it. But you also mentioned something that was very important earlier on, and that's medical CE. Now, let's talk a little bit about that. Can you please share the importance of that medical CE on a brand or on a device?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, people are going to look at these devices and say, "Oh, this is FDA approval, FDA clearance, medical CE." Which one is important? Medical CE, which is the medical license to treat something, is 100%, without a shadow of a doubt, the most important one. FDA approval is completely useless, and the FDA is a complete waste of space, in my opinion. This is the same organization, they were advertising smoking a long time ago as a health benefit. And I believe that they were doing that because they received money from the tobacco industry. This is the kind of organization that the FDA is. What use is their clearance or approval? People need to look at clearances and things, and they need to see that actually approval doesn't mean anything, because I can make something that's approved. I can get some lights out of my TV screen, put it on a sheet and an elastic band to wrap it around my head, and then I can take it to the FDA to get it approved. All I have to do is say it works in the same way as something else that's already been approved, and that's called equivalence. And it can be approved by equivalence. And then there's testing where I can show that it's good. No one does that because you get the same thing at the end of the day. So why put more effort in? And then you get something like medical CE, which far outweighs such a useless sort of mark as FDA approval or clearance. Medical CE requires you to be absolutely top notch at treating a specific condition. That's very different to say my device works in a similar way to that device. It can be terrible, but it still gets approved. But if it's terrible, it's not going to get medical CE. And you have to show that you have absolute confidence and proof that you are able to clear a condition based on rigorous scientific testing and scientific evidence in order to achieve medical CE. And at the end of the day, we're treating patients to achieve medical results, i.e. clearances of conditions. And that's what medical CE represents, a clearance of condition. And so that's the most important thing to look for.
What does the CE stand for?
To be honest, I'm not actually sure. I've never looked into that.
I've
Must be
never looked
a
into it either.
certificate of something. I have no
I've
idea.
always wanted to know. I've never actually looked it up. I think that's something that everyone will jump off the podcast and go and look up medical. What does their CE stand for? But regardless, look, we hear you. It is very important to the person that's actually performing the treatment on the, I suppose, on the front face of this whole thing, which is the therapist, because you're
Yeah,
actually talking to the patient. You're the one that's promising the result. You're the one that's
yeah,
wanting to see, those results on that client. But really, honestly, to change that person's life and to make that person happy. The last thing we want to do as therapists and as clinic owners is to promise something and then have the patient thoroughly disappointed. You have people that with heartbreaking conditions like psoriasis,
yeah.
acne in of itself can be extremely debilitating to a person's life if the conditions are quite severe for the acne, and if the person's quite young as well. It can affect every area of your life. It is an emotional
Mm,
condition, same with
yeah.
psoriasis. And that's why it is so, like, it's just so heartwarming and so incredible to hear that medical CE for Dermalux is specifically for psoriasis, acne, wound healing, things like pain relief. But tell us a little bit about why Dermalux has that medical CE to treat psoriasis, whereas
Sure.
other systems probably don't go that far.
Yeah, I mean, if you find a system that doesn't have the medical city by the, which is everything else, hint, hint,
Mm.
you can't have full confidence that you're going to get the best possible result. You might get a decent result, but you're not going to have confidence that it's going to do that every time. And the reason Dermalux does it goes back to the quality of the LED and how they've built the machine around the LED. LED is everything. If you don't have a good LED and you don't build your machine around it, you're never going to get the best results. In other words, you're never going to get the medical CE. And with the LED design they have and the lack of drop in optical intensity from start to finish of the treatment, you are essentially be able to generate much more biological change in a given period of time with Dermalux than with other devices. And that's why you can get better results. And that's why they are able to prove that they get, the best results in these particular skin conditions. And that's why they have that medical CE.
Right. And, we were talking about wavelengths and energy output and things like that. With regards to wavelengths, what should you actually be looking for when you're choosing or when you're thinking about purchasing an LED system?
Sure. I mean, there's lots of different wavelengths, and what people may get confused by is different treatment modalities have different wavelengths. So in LED, the wavelengths with the most scientific data is red, blue, and near infrared. We'll go into the numbers in a second, but people will see devices with things like green and yellow and all this
Yes.
nonsense. You will find those wavelengths, they can have an effect, but outside of an LED context. For example, you might find a wavelength that says, 1927 is great, but actually that's great in a laser context because you can use that in a laser system, the way that a laser is built, focusing the energy into one particular place. But the way that LED works, that wavelength won't really have an effect. And so you have to look at the fact that it's LED and only certain wavelengths have been shown to be useful in an LED context, even if you hear about other wavelengths. And the red, we know really has to be around 633 nanometers, that is. Blue 415 and near infrared 830. And it might sound really technical and pedantic to have those numbers, but at the end of the day, if those numbers aren't right, think about it, you're not actually going to achieve the result that you're after. Because we talked about red earlier hitting the ability to make ATP. There's only a specific wavelength in the same way there's only a specific key that will open one lock. And if you stray from that, you're just not really
Mm.
going to have an effect and you're just going to heat things up. And that's why the accuracy of the lead is so important. Dermalux, we said, has plus or minus 2 nanometers. So if you aim for 633, the worst you're going to get is 631 or 635. And that's the closest anyone will get. I've seen devices which claim to be the best on the market. They have a peak tolerance of plus or minus 5 or 6. It's up to 3 times more inaccurate than Dermalux. And so no wonder they don't have that medical CE because they're wasting energy producing wavelengths that are
Mm.
useless. And so when you're using energy and nearly all of what you're producing is the intended wavelength, then you're going to get much better results. And a lot of people don't realize that if a machine says it has this particular wavelength, oh, I'm going to output that. Actually, no, you're not. you're only going to output some energy at that particular wavelength. And the rest of it is going to be a little bit above and a little bit below. And if it's far below there and you're using on a blue, then you might even be generating UV, because that's a lot
Wow.
shorter than blue. If you're outputting really far from the infrared, you might actually see a bit of red coming from the machine. And some people might think, oh, I can see it's working, it's a bit of red. No, that's terrible, because near infrared shouldn't be visible. But if you're seeing red, it means it's that inaccurate. It's in a completely different part of the spectrum. And so now you can understand why certain devices just don't get good results, because they're so inaccurate. And so these wavelengths have to be produced, which sounds obvious, and they are. But if you're producing other things alongside, you're wasting time. You're wasting everyone's time, and you're selling a full stream to the patient. But those are the important wavelengths in LED, and other wavelengths do exist outside of an LED context.
And near infrared is the important one, but what about red?
So red
and near
is, red and near infrared together are going to work really, really well, because one is going to photo displace nitrogen monoxide, and the other is going to optimize the efficiency of that metabolic chain, which nitrogen monoxide was blocking.
Right, so together they're more powerful, red and near infrared.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to be careful. Some patients can't take the red, depending on how inflamed they are, because red will increase the activity. And if your skin is in a baseline inflammatory state, all you can do is increase the activity, which in this case is inflammation. So a lot of cases you might need just near infrared on its own first. Then when the needle tips from inflammation to non-inflammation, then you can add in red, and it just accelerates it more into non-inflammatory activity. So if you imagine, imagine an old school speedometer in a car. Nowadays we have sort of radial speedometers. Imagine a sort of linear speedometer where it just goes from left to right instead of round a circle. And on one end of that old school speedo, you've got inflammation or inflammatory activity, and on the other end you've got non-inflammatory activity or healthy activity, shall we say. Red accelerates the movement of the needle to either end. So if you're already in one half of it, it's going to go to that end. So what you need to do is wait for the inflammation to tip past the 50% mark, and then when it's just into the healthy area, then you can add in red and accelerate it towards health.
Okay, I actually didn't even know that part of it, because my understanding was red and near infrared together is more powerful. Why? Because of the accelerated process, but you're right. An inflammatory state is, inflammation is the common, really the common causative factor in most skin conditions and most illnesses,
absolutely.
Chronic uncontrolled long-term inflammation is the worst type. Obviously, we've got inflammation for a reason, and it's needed in our body for various reasons, but that chronic long-term uncontrolled, really sort of destructive type is the type that we're trying to counteract, and especially that's what LED is extremely good for. But the red can push it in either direction is quite an eye-opener for me, and I think a lot of people listening to this need to understand that, because many LED devices come with red and near infrared, and they tell you, oh, mine is more powerful than the other, and mine is more stimulating than the other, and perhaps that's not exactly what we should be looking for. My question to you is, how does time affect this whole equation? So we're talking about the wavelength, we're talking about dispersing the heat and delivering the right type of energy to the cell, but how does time factor into this? Can you be sitting under an LED for too long?
It's a good question. I don't think there's been a paper that specifically put someone up in potential harm's way by doing it too long, and I don't think they would, because they'd get a lot of flack for doing that for a patient.
I can imagine.
I think in terms of how long you do it for, 20 minutes seems to, or 1200 seconds seems to be a time that we have good scientific evidence for. I've never put anyone on for longer than that. I've never done myself for longer than that. So I don't know the answer to that. But at the same time, do we need to put anyone in longer than that? What is the purpose of that? Because if we're already able to show phenomenal results and the best results by just 20 minutes, then why do any more? And at the end of the day, economically speaking, you have to be efficient with time as well. And no patient wants to sit there for an hour when they can sit there for just 20 minutes.
Of course. And also, my question is, does it actually harm? Dosage, you'd think, okay, a certain amount is great, but then what about if you're sitting there for too long? Does it counteract the effect?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're using near infrared, in my opinion, theoretically, you probably won't get that much damage at all, if any, because all you're doing is reducing inflammation. You're never going to harm someone by reducing inflammation. With something like blue light, I suspect, yes, you could, because part of the process through which blue light works is creating a bit of oxidative stress in the cells, in the same way
Yes.
that you create a physical stress on myofibers when you go to the gym by breaking them, and then they grow. But if you break them completely and everywhere, then you've gone past that golden window and you're just going to wither away. So there's a golden window of hormesis in that as well when you go to the gym, and cells are going to the gym when you use blue light. And if you go there too much, there's going to be too much oxidative stress and it's going to cause a problem. So potentially, yeah, I would say there is a chance that you could do too much in certain wavelengths.
That's a great explanation. When we are in practice, so when a therapist is treating a client, we have so many modalities at our disposal. As a clinic owner, I love, we love purchasing modalities. Some of them sit there for probably unused or not utilized so well. Because they're heat-based modalities, and some therapists are a little bit, I would say, reticent to overuse them, and they probably don't know how to use them in a safe way. I have a belief, and I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing, that pre-treating our patients with LED to reduce inflammation, say, for example, pigmentation treatments, and post-pigmentation treatments, my results have been through the roof. Doing a course of LED beforehand and then post, a little bit, not straight away, but a little bit after. Can we use LED in combination with other modalities? What is the benefit of doing pre and post? Are we on the right track here?
Yeah, I would say pre and post is on the right track, and you can go even further on that right track by using it not just sort of in the weeks following, but immediately post as well. So before the patient's even finished left the room, and that would give you the most complete package, or the most complete benefit system, if you like. So you can use it pre-op, in the weeks leading up to it. Let's say a few sessions a week for 2 weeks. You can do more if you want to, but I think at the end of the day, you've got to be economic too. To sort of reduce the inflammation, to optimize the cell function. Then you do whatever your treatment is. You clean the skin immediately after and dry it. Patient stays exactly where they are. Then you put, the LED on straight away. And then for a couple of weeks after, you can add the LED in as well to speed up recovery and healing and growth from whatever it was that you did.
I'm a subscriber to doing that immediately post. Some people would say something like skin needling, you shouldn't do an LED straight after because you want that inflammation. What's your opinion with regards to immediately post a traumatic treatment to induce trauma? What's your opinion on lessening that trauma immediately after?
Sure. So anyone that tells you, you want that inflammation, you need to put them in the bin and go somewhere else because they're completely wrong. Now, when you're increasing inflammation, think about it. That's how scars are made. A manufacturer will always tell you don't over needle. Why shouldn't you over needle? Because you're going to cause too much inflammation. So how can they say don't cause too much inflammation from over needling, and at the same time say you want inflammation? They're literally contradicting themselves. And so red, you want to completely stay clear of after needling, because the skin is inflamed. You increase that inflammation to the point where the body wants to protect itself. It forms scar tissue. It's going to create collagen type 1 in that dermis. But if it's oriented in a way that suggests fibrosis, then you're going to get a scar. If it's oriented in the way that healthy skin is, i.e. perpendicular, like a basket weave, like a trampoline, it's going to be nice and bouncy. If they're all parallel on top of each other, that's a scar. And what dictates which one the body does? It's the level of trauma. And if you keep increasing that inflammation, the trauma is going to be much, much bigger. So I would never, ever, ever use red post-op, but I would always use blue and near infrared, because the near infrared will reduce that inflammation, and it will ensure that the collagen type 1 is laid down in a crisscross pattern to create a sort of bouncy trampoline effect, instead of a scar. And the blue will just sort of destroy all the bacteria. There's nothing wrong with using red in the healing period to optimize cell function then. That why would you bring your patient closer to a scar? If you think inflammation is better and that gives you better skin, why don't you just take a chainsaw to your face? Why don't you just hack it with a kitchen knife? That's the logic that people that have. Why,
Yeah.
if you think inflammation is better, just don't stop needling. Do it for 24 hours straight. That's going to give you way more inflammation. Is that going to give you the best skin of your life? No, it's going to completely destroy your face. So people need to apply this logic and common sense to it and stay clear of trying to create as much inflammation as possible. That's not good. Where is as much inflammation as possible good in any context? If a plastic surgeon does a facelift, they're not going to say, oh, I want to create more inflammation, I want to cause more damage. They go, no, I want to be as minimal as possible. Otherwise, they're going to get a scar. And at the end of the day, a scalpel going through the skin is no different to a needle going through the skin as far as the body is concerned. You're still cleaving that dermoepidermal junction. You're still relieving collagen of its inert biomarkers, which then become active to then draw things like platelets in with von Willebrand's factor A1 that then causes that entire clotting process. It doesn't matter whether it's a needle causes it or a scalpel. If there's too much inflammation, then that's what's going to happen.
Dr. Abs, you are, and the science that you have talked about today are the reason why I myself personally and so many other clinic owners and therapists do what we do. We love, absolutely, we're all skin nerds. We love the science. You have just opened our eyes so much. What an exciting episode today. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us about dermox.
Can I add one thing before I go?
Absolutely.
Sure. I would, if people want to look at an example of using a red in the wrong place to make things worse, I would go to YouTube, just type in Dr. Abs, you will find my channel. And I actually had a patient that I specifically wanted only blue and near infrared for to treat their acne, referred her somewhere. That place used red without listening to me, and the acne got much, much worse. Then I re-referred her to somewhere that used just blue and near infrared, and it got much, much better. And you can see the result after both sessions, and you can see the patient giving her own sort of feedback and testimonial of what happened as well, just so that you don't make that mistake.
That is incredible. Can I ask one final question about dermal specifically? You were talking about, separating obviously red from near infrared and the dermal. Can you select just near infrared and treat somebody on a just near infrared or just blue on its own?
Absolutely. You can customize the treatment, and then I do that every single time. The presets are there, like, post-treatment healing, rejuvenation, all that kind of stuff. I would actually implore people to just learn the wavelengths. It's not difficult. You can do it in a space of half an hour, get to grips with the basics of it, maybe even less. And then you just decide what sort of benefit you need for that patient. Oh, they just had a treatment. They need to make sure there's no bacteria. Fine, add blue. They need to make sure that because of this, also there's not too much inflammation, so they don't get hyperpigmentation. Fine, let's add near infrared. But because of the trauma they've just had in this treatment, I don't want the inflammation to increase, so let's not include red. And these are the thought processes that people should have when they're treating people to decide which wavelengths to use. So on that thought process there, I've said no to red, and I've said yes to blue and near infrared. And I would just customize those two for however long I need.
Wow, blown mind. That is incredible. And I'm going to go and do some research after this podcast. Really need to do a little bit more. Have you got any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I would say if people are really genuinely interested in learning about this, first of all, explore that interest, because you're going to learn so much more, not just about LED, but also about skin, about physics, about other treatment modalities, and really go to town with it, because it's going to make you a better clinician. And if people are interested beyond that, I'm working on an LED course right now. It's going to be online, so anyone can use it anywhere. It's going to be the equivalent of sort of 3 full days of content because of how in-depth the knowledge is. It'll be more in-depth than any other LED education in the world on this topic, and everything I've mentioned today in terms of how in-depth it is. I go into those same topics, but I explain it in even more detail and in even more time. And hopefully that will be out within the next sort of 6 months or so.
Sign me up. I am definitely going to attend that one. And I can say the same to my staff. That's incredible. I think knowledge is power, and a lot of the time why therapists are hesitant to treat is because they don't actually feel confident in what they're doing. They don't have the knowledge to be able to do it. And, as a clinic owner, that results in lost opportunities for the business, and lost opportunities for your client, for the person that we're supposed to be helping. They're walking out of the door not getting our full assistance, our full, range of what we can do, because, you know, we're lacking in education and knowledge. The best thing you can do for your clinic and the best thing you can do for your staff and patients is to get that knowledge. And, you know, at ABIC, we're hugely focused on education. We have our educational conferences every year and we facilitate education. Our podcast is an education podcast to have people such as yourself, Dr. Abs, come on and really help us to understand the processes. And of course, Professional Beauty Solutions is the distributor of Dermalux, and like Dermalux has gone to the absolute nth degree in attention to detail with the partners that they work with, hence why we're speaking with you today, Dr. Abs, and you can just see the quality of information given, and that's the quality of the actual treatment that you're going to get from Dermalux, and also the service that you're going to get from Professional Beauty Solutions, who are also foundation members of ABIC, giving back to the industry in such a huge way and supporting our industry of becoming members of ABIC. So we'd like to thank yourself, Professional Beauty Solutions, and Dermalux as well for this wonderful podcast today and supporting the industry. Thank you so much.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Beauty by ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay connected.